What is acknowledgement? And welcome to Philosopher's Corner. I'm John. What is acknowledgement? The standard definition is admitting the existence or the truth of something. Well, that seems simple enough, even though when we look at human psychology has a process for acceptance of new information, and the first step is denial. So acknowledgement is in direct contrast and directly the opposite of how the human psychology is set up for most new information. So denial and acknowledgement, right? So denial is the resistance to acknowledgement. It's put there in place to try to stop accepting the truth or the existence of something. And in fact, it would seem that one of the great progresses of science itself was simply the scientific method, so that towards the front of that process of trying to bring in new information and accept new information and to engage in acknowledgement, we could have a 5-step process to put in there in our conscious mind, the scientific method, so that we could have a reliable, rational, logical process in the front of our information inloading area to diminish the effect of denial. And if not expressly to diminish the effect of denial, at least to speed up the process of denial so that acknowledgement could then occur. Acknowledgement being recognizing the truth or existence of something. There's really no subjectivity in it, in acknowledgement. And it doesn't necessarily compel the person who's acknowledging something to do anything with it. But as human beings, we know that once something is acknowledged, it's going to be processed nearly involuntarily, which I think is why denial is the default setting on human psychology for information intake, because it's so wary of so much information that denial acts like a buffer, so that something really, really has to be prominent and affecting the observer in the situation for them to acknowledge it. Now, my brother, who's also a wise man, he said, I hope I'm getting this right, acknowledgement is the key to growth, which I agree with. Acknowledgement is the key to growth. And because we know that once a person is in life, and we know that, or we can see that evolutionary growth or intellectual growth, or however you want to label the type of growth, but overall growth of a person is keyed by, it's not just keyed by things happening to them. Things happen to animals. Like, information is available to animals of every consciousness level and every sentience level. But not all animals grow simply because they come into contact with information or truth or concepts. And not even all human beings, I'm sorry, excuse me, and not even all human beings experience growth to the degree that you would assume they would by being in the world. And the key, when you look at certain humans that have certain level of growths, and you have other humans that have much more asymptotic levels of growth or explosive growth or high growth, high rate growth compared to some other humans, given that their abilities are in the same area, in the same ballpark, one of the keys that really pops out is the ability to acknowledge. And acknowledgement is the recognition, the admission of something that's true or something that's existing. So it's not interpretive. This isn't, these are just how in what manner can you accept what's actually true, like facts, realities, things that are occurring. These aren't fancy, these aren't hard to get to conclusions. This is just a part of the regular healthy operating system. Excuse me. Now, as you get deeper into the intellectual world of humanity, acknowledgement becomes more complex because there are more sophisticated things. But the premise of it, in terms of how it fits into our growth, is very simple. You acknowledge something, a truth or a fact or something that exists, and now it's part of your information puzzles. It's becoming part of your worldview, and the human system tries to find a way to work it out, fit it in. Where does it fit into this cosmology? Like, where does it fit into this worldview? And furthermore, as one lives longer and longer and becomes more and more aware, you realize that adding and acknowledging things to your worldview has a synergy that changes the worldview to some degree. You don't know how. Sometimes it can be something mundane, and sometimes it can be something that fundamentally changes everything. But it's often difficult to tell. You can't really differentiate usually one from the other, because something that could seem like very small and normal could end up having like just a massive change in your worldview, change the whole atmosphere, change the whole chemistry of your world. And I think that's why the human psychology has that denial aspect, because it's uncertain of what could potentially upend a person's current worldview. And psychologically, that feels like death. Like any major change to the psyche, it feels like death. Now, acknowledgement as growth, what is acknowledgement in terms of when we talked about in another video that life is a process of bringing conscious into unconscious, or rather strike that unconscious into the conscious. Acknowledgement is the thing. That's the first step of taking something out of the unconscious and into the conscious. Because acknowledgement is simply the act of recognizing something that already is. There's no imagination needed for acknowledgement. It's bare bones fundamentals. You know, like there's air. I'm breathing air. Well, that's an acknowledgement. Right? We'll take this for example. So I acknowledge that air exists. Right? Okay, now I know air. Now I'm telling my brain, air exists. Okay. Now there's a stream of information that's being unlocked by that. Oh, that means there's air all around this atmosphere. That means, oh, air is going into my lungs. Oh, the air is processed in my lungs and oxygen is taken out of it to send to my blood to pair with my hemoglobin, carry oxygen around to my vital organs. Oh, my body runs on an oxygen mixture that's internal. Wow, I really need the air. Oh, maybe there are things I can do in regards to my breathing. I can become conscious of my breathing of the air. Oh, maybe if I become more conscious of this air that I'm breathing into my lungs, and I direct it with other things, I can get other biological results from my breathing. Now that I've become conscious, now that my acknowledgement has led me to consciousness of my air I'm breathing. Oh, and then I realize now that when I go to certain areas, the air has a better effect on my body. If I go to places with smog, my body doesn't like that. But if I go to the beach on a nice day, and now that I'm aware of the air and I've acknowledged it, now I like this kind of air better. Oh, this air seems to be better for me. Oh, when I go skiing at high altitudes, I get kind of dizzy. Oh, there's less air, there's less oxygen in the air. Oh, okay. Well, I'll have to adjust for that, right? So there's this whole spider web of the network of thinking and effects, causes and effects that occur when I acknowledge something as simple as it's air I'm breathing. because the acknowledgement is the process that takes something from the unconscious and makes it conscious. And the link to us philosophically and as it pertains to our sort of evolutionary growth is that the process of taking something from the unconscious to the conscious is what then makes it a part of the environment that we can expose and put under the magnifying lens and the influence of our intellect and of our consciousness. So acknowledgement can be the process of taking something from the unconscious and putting it into the conscious. And when we take something from the unconscious and put it into the conscious, what we're also saying is now that our consciousness can come into play. Because until our consciousness is aware of something, it can't directly interact with it. It can't be subject to our awareness, our will, our intent, any of that. And that's what denial keeps us from. Now, it's not to say denial is bad in every case, because we are human beings, we need to develop, and you don't want to be 10 years old and like know about macroeconomics and geopolitical terrorism, because it's too much information to process and the brain's not well developed enough and the consciousness isn't well developed enough. But when you're 40, you should. So it is. So denial does have a good sequencing. You know, it has sequencing for a reason. It's not there to just deny a human being accelerated learning. And when a person gets used to acknowledging things, a lot of things we'd rather not acknowledge, but they're just true and they exist. So keeping oneself blind to it is the bigger danger than the acknowledgement of the thing. We can have our emotions start to inform us of things that can be accepted quicker, and the denial phase can be pared down to very short amounts of time so that the acknowledgement phase can occur quicker, and then growth can occur quicker. And when we get into talking about how meditation operates and like what is meditation and why, you know, how it's useful for us and what it provides, meditation is another area where if we can learn to dampen denial and heighten acknowledgement, then the meditation and the information derived in meditation can be accelerated, which is one of the great biohacks and life cycle ratio advantages in life. So the acknowledgement, the recognition of something that's true or exists, is what then, from our conscious perspective, allows us to validate that thing into our worldview, which then allows it to be available for use to our consciousness, for worldview building, for interacting, for pieces on our personal game board, however you want to describe it. It makes it available for us to use. So I think that's pretty good covered on acknowledgement. So, well, I hope you found this helpful. I hope you acknowledge that it is. Acknowledgement is key to growth. Thanks to my brother Jameson for that one. And I hope you found this helpful. Thanks for spending some time here at Philosopher's Corner, and have fun.